One of the most powerful discoveries in neuroscience over the last few decades is the realization that the experience of pain is not fixed. Pain is not simply a direct reflection of injury or damage in the body. Instead, pain is a complex, subjective experience, one that is deeply modulated by the brain, specifically by factors such as perception, expectation, and especially the sense of control. Two people can experience the exact same physical stimulus, say, a sharp pinprick or intense muscle fatigue, and report very different levels of pain. This difference is not because of variance in nerve endings, but rather differences in how the brain processes and regulates that input. Reason for a second, every moment of our daily lives, our environment and habits are actively rewriting the circuitry of our brain. This dynamic interplay between our surroundings and our behavior shapes not only how we experience pain and pleasure today, but also how we will respond in the future. Our physical environment, the light, sound, and even the tactile feedback of what surrounds us, along with the daily habits we ingrain, forms a continuous feedback loop. This loop adjusts our pain thresholds, modulates our ability to experience pleasure, and influences our overall mood, motivation, and resilience. Consider how seemingly minor factors in our environment can lead to profound changes in our brain chemistry. Living in a space filled with natural light, for instance, can elevate mood and enhance the quality of sleep by regulating the circadian rhythm through the suprachiasmatic nucleus. Adequate quality sleep is essential for the brain's ability to process and consolidate emotional experiences. It is during sleep that the brain rebalances neurotransmitter levels, repairs synaptic connections, and clears away metabolic waste. In contrast, environments that are poorly lit, noisy, or overstimulating can stress our sensory systems, hampering the delicate balance between pain and pleasure by promoting a constant state of arousal and mild anxiety. Over time, this can dampen the reward circuits and make even normally pleasurable activities feel less satisfying. Our habits are perhaps even more influential on the neural circuits of pain and pleasure than our immediate surroundings. Habits form through repeated neural activity, which gradually builds new pathways and, in some cases, suppresses or overwrites previous ones. For example, if you routinely select comfort over challenge, choosing to binge, watch television instead of engaging in exercise or creative work, you reinforce neural patterns that expect immediate, effortless rewards. These patterns prime the brain to respond to stimuli with minimal effort, often to the detriment of building resilience. When everything is easy and instantly gratifying, the brain's natural capacity for growth through challenge is underutilized. The overabundance of effortless pleasure causes the reward systems, primarily regulated by dopamine, to become less sensitive over time. In neuroscience terms, these circuits undergo a form of desensitization, where more stimulation is needed to achieve the same level of satisfaction. This adaptation has a cyclical effect. When the baseline of your reward system is set so high, driven by constant unearned rewards, the slightest discomfort or ordinary effort can feel much more painful or draining. The heightened sensitivity to minor stressors then creates a barrier to further challenging pursuits, because the brain starts to relegate effort to the realm of pain rather than the precursor reward. Conversely, deliberately choosing habits that involve effort, habitually engaging in challenging activities such as exercise, learning new skills, or even enduring a cold shower, can recalibrate this system. When you deliberately incorporate controlled discomfort into your daily routine, you are actively training your brain to adapt. Neural pathways that mediate effort and reward are strengthened, resulting in a more robust capacity for pleasure once the challenge is overcome. It is crucial to understand that these shifts in neural circuitry are a testament to the brain's plasticity, its remarkable ability to change in response to the environment. Habits are not fixed traits, they are malleable. Each time you decide to push through a challenge, your brain reinforces new connections that reward persistence over passivity. Over months and years, this continuous process can produce lasting changes in both structure and function. The mesolimbic dopamine system, responsible for the motivating drive toward rewards, can be reset. By consciously making choices that blend effort and purpose, you gradually recalibrate your baseline, making every success, however small, feel more significant and every challenge more bearable. Even the organization of your daily schedule plays an important role. Structuring your day to include moments of focused activity interspersed with deliberate rest can prevent the plateauing of dopamine receptors. For instance, scheduling blocks of deep, uninterrupted work, where distraction is minimized, allows your brain to enter a state of flow. In flow, the engagement with the task at hand naturally combines intense focus with a modulated experience of effort. Many people report that during these states, even if the work is demanding, they experience a subtle sense of euphoria and satisfaction that far surpasses that of mindless leisure. This phenomenon is not accidental. It is the brain's reward system responding to a challenge met with success and mastery. This kind of pleasure is deeper and more enduring because it is linked to genuine achievement rather than transient stimuli. The role of physical activity in shaping these circuits cannot be overstated either. Our modern lifestyle often encourages prolonged sedentary behavior, which can lead to a host of physical and mental issues. Regular physical exercise, whether it's resistance training, running, or yoga, triggers the release of endorphins and boosts dopamine levels in a sustained way. Furthermore, exercise has been shown to increase the volume of certain brain regions like the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex areas associated with learning, memory, and emotional regulation. This neuroanatomical remodeling underlines a simple truth. The more you move, the more your brain adapts to seek the challenge and benefit from the resulting pleasure. Beyond individual habits, the social environment also plays a critical role. Humans are inherently social creatures, wired to seek connection and meaning through relationships. The quality of social interactions being with supportive, positive people versus those who are negative or draining can directly influence the sensitivity of our pain and pleasure circuits. Social isolation or chronic interpersonal conflict can heighten stress responses and make the brain more sensitive to pain, both physical and emotional. In contrast, meaningful social connections can enhance the release of oxytocin and dopamine, creating a buffer against stress and enhancing overall well-being. Even the simple act of sharing a laugh or a heartfelt conversation recalibrates the brain's reward system in subtle yet powerful ways. Technology, though it has revolutionized communication and convenience, often works at cross purposes with the cultivation of healthy habits. The design of many digital platforms intentionally exploits the brain's reward circuits by providing intermittent, unpredictable rewards that trigger dopamine spikes. Overuse of these platforms, such as constant checking of notifications or endless scrolling, can recalibrate the brain to crave rapid, fire rewards rather than more meaningful, sustained ones. This digital environment conditions you to value instant gratification, making it exceedingly difficult to engage in activities that require longer periods of focused effort, activities that are, paradoxically, the very ones that build long-term pleasure and resilience. What all this tells us is that both environment and habits are powerful determinants of how our brain processes pain and pleasure. They are not immutable forces. They are variables that can be adjusted through intentional action. Every choice you make about your environment, what you expose your senses to, and every habit you form tells your brain a story about what is normal, acceptable, and even desirable. If your story is one of constant ease and effortless reward, your brain adapts by raising its threshold for what it considers pleasurable. But if your story includes episodes of challenge, purpose, and the deliberate embrace of controlled discomfort, your brain begins to see effort as both normal and desirable, recalibrating your entire reward system accordingly. This recalibration has far-reaching implications. When you consciously shape your environment by creating a workspace that minimizes distractions, designing a home that promotes calm and focus, or even spending time in nature, you are laying the groundwork for healthier neural responses, And when you cultivate habits that encourage effort and delay gratification, you're training your neural circuits to value process over immediate outcomes. In practical terms, this means that instead of feeling overwhelmed by minor stressors and deprived of genuine pleasure, you build a system where everyday challenges are met with calm resilience, and every victory, however small, feels deeply rewarding. Moreover, the process of reshaping your brain's circuitry through environment and habit is incremental. Every decision, from choosing to work in a quiet room instead of a cluttered office, to opting for a brisk walk rather than an extra episode of television, makes a cumulative difference. Over time, these small changes add up, reinforcing a neural framework that is resilient, adaptive, and oriented towards sustained well-being. This cumulative effect is why long-term lifestyle changes are so powerful. They reset the baseline of your entire nervous system, allowing you to experience pain and pleasure in a more balanced, healthy way. In essence, the power to shape your experience of pain and pleasure lies in the simple, everyday choices you make. Environmental cues and habitual behaviors are not passive occurrences. They are active, dynamic forces that sculpt your brain's architecture. By intentionally designing your environment to reduce needless stress and by cultivating habits that encourage effort and resilience, you create a feedback loop that enhances your overall quality of life. This process requires mindfulness, commitment, and an understanding that every moment is an opportunity to reinforce a healthier way of being. When you begin to appreciate the profound impact of your surroundings and your habits, you're empowered to take control of your own experience, transforming pain into a signal for growth and turning effort into a gateway to deeper, more authentic pleasure. Over time, this intentional approach not only recalibrates your pain and pleasure circuits, but also fosters a renewed sense of self, where challenges are met with confidence, and every rewarding experience is savored with a richness that only comes from truly earning it. At the core of this modulation is something known as top-down control, which refers to how the prefrontal cortex, the region of the brain involved in decision making, focus, and self-reflection, can influence activity in the pain processing areas of the brain, including the thalamus, insula, anterior cingulate cortex, and somatosensory cortex. When we believe that we have control over a painful experience, when we think that we can stop it, predict its duration, or choose it voluntarily, our brain's top-down circuitry activates and begins suppressing the pain signal. In contrast, when we feel helpless or caught off guard, the same signal becomes overwhelming. This phenomenon has been demonstrated in numerous studies, both in animals and humans. For instance, in one famous experiment, participants were exposed to a painful heat stimulus. When they were told they could stop the heat at any moment by pressing a button, even if they didn't press it, their reported pain levels dropped dramatically. Simply believing they had control activated descending pain modulatory systems in the brainstem, specifically involving structures like the piri, aqueductal gray pag, and rostroventromedial med, RVM. These systems send inhibitory signals down the spinal cord that reduce the transmission of pain signals from the body to the brain. This is not just an abstract neurological concept, it's deeply practical. When you interpret a painful stimulus as being under your control, you engage brain circuits that literally turn down the volume on that pain. This is why pain that is self-imposed or understood in context, such as pain during exercise, childbirth, or even in medical treatments like surgery, is often tolerated far better than random, unexpected pain. The meaning we assign to discomfort directly alters the intensity with which we experience it. Now, how does this connect to pleasure? When you gain control over your pain system, you don't just suppress discomfort, you also amplify the potential for reward. This is because many of the same circuits involved in suppressing pain also interact with the brain's reward centers. For example, the dopamine system is not only involved in motivation and reward, but is also highly responsive to controllability. If you believe that the effort or discomfort you're enduring is going to lead to a desirable outcome, dopamine rises not just after success, but during the process itself. This helps explain why people can enjoy activities that are, on the surface, physically unpleasant. Ice baths, endurance running, high-intensity training. In each of these examples, the individual voluntarily chooses the discomfort, assigns meaning to it, and experiences a rise in dopamine and endorphins. This combination can create a euphoric or deeply satisfying state following the activity, but more importantly, it reconditions the brain's relationship to effort and discomfort. Over time, what was once painful becomes not only tolerable but pleasurable in its aftermath. Perception of control also plays a critical role in chronic pain and emotional suffering. When individuals experience chronic pain that they do not understand, cannot predict, or feel powerless to change, the pain becomes worse over time. Brain imaging studies show that in these cases, the brain's default mode network, often associated with rumination and self-referential thought, becomes hyperactive. This network, when engaged in the context of uncontrollable pain, can amplify the emotional distress associated with the pain, making it harder to ignore or suppress. But when patients are educated about pain, when they are shown tools that allow them to modulate their experience, and when they begin to believe that they can influence their pain, a shift occurs. The top-down control systems become active again. Neuroplasticity begins to favor inhibition over amplification, and in many cases, the intensity and frequency of chronic pain begins to decrease. This is the principle behind many modern pain rehabilitation programs that include education, breathwork, movement, and mindset reframing, not because the pain is imagined, but because the brain is capable of modulating it when empowered to do so. Breathing is one of the most accessible and potent tools we have for engaging this pain control circuitry. Specific breathing patterns such as slow, deliberate nasal inhales followed by long, slow exhales can reduce pain by increasing parasympathetic tone. This activates vagal pathways that decrease heart rate, lower inflammation, and reduce the brain's perception of threat. Just a few minutes of this type of breathing can shift the nervous system from a state of hyperarousal and pain amplification to one of regulation and resilience. Another approach involves interoception, which is the ability to sense internal bodily states. Interoceptive awareness is trained through mindfulness practices and somatic attention techniques. When individuals learn to focus on sensations in the body like temperature, pressure, or muscle tension without judgment or resistance, they begin to separate pain from panic. This distinction is vital. When we panic in response to pain, we increase sympathetic arousal, which in turn increases pain sensitivity. But when we observe pain with curiosity and neutrality, we activate cognitive control systems that buffer and even reduce the experience of pain. Interestingly, these same practices also enhance the brain's response to pleasure. When we become more attuned to subtle bodily states, we begin to derive more joy from small, previously unnoticed experiences. The warmth of sunlight, the rhythm of the breath, the calm after exertion. This is because the pleasure system of the brain is also interoceptive. It interprets signals from the body to register safety, fulfillment, and satisfaction. So, by training ourselves to modulate pain through perception, control, and breath, we simultaneously increase our sensitivity to authentic, sustainable pleasure. Moreover, focus plays a key role. Pain demands attention, it screams for it, but the brain is limited in how much it can attend to at one time. So, when we train focus through deep work, meditation, or breath control, we increase our ability to redirect attention away from pain and toward purpose. This shift doesn't deny pain, it repositions it in the larger frame of experience. And when the brain is deeply engaged in meaningful work, creative flow, or interpersonal connection, the salience of pain diminishes. This effect is not imagined. It's observable in real time in brain scans as activity shifts away from pain centers and toward executive and reward circuits. This is why people can endure great suffering in service of something greater, whether that's building a business, raising a child, serving a cause, or pursuing mastery in a skill. The brain, when directed by purpose and imbued with perceived control, reclassifies pain. It no longer treats it as a threat to be escaped, but as a challenge to be integrated. And from a neurobiological perspective, this integration results in greater emotional stability, physical resilience, and access to positive effect. To make this actionable, we can turn to a simple model: identify, breathe, reframe, redirect. First, identify the pain, physical or emotional, as a signal, not a sentence. Second, use breath to ground the body and signal safety to the nervous system. Third, reframe the discomfort in terms of growth, value, or direction. And finally, redirect focus to action, however small, that aligns with your goals. Over time, this practice strengthens the brain's descending pain modulatory system, increases dopamine signaling in response to challenge, and rewires the narrative around suffering. We are not hardwired to avoid pain at all costs. We are designed to learn from it, grow through it, and find meaning within it. The perception of control is the key that unlocks this transformation. When you feel empowered to act even in small ways, your brain shifts from defense to engagement. And when you regularly engage with pain on your own terms, you reclaim not only comfort but the ability to experience deeper pleasure, deeper connection, and greater joy in everyday life. This isn't about denying pain, it's about developing a relationship with it, a relationship rooted in curiosity, agency, and respect. When you do this consistently, you train your nervous system not just to endure life, but to participate fully in it with all its highs and lows, with resilience, and with a deeply earned sense of peace. Pain and pleasure are not isolated domains, they exist within a shared framework of neural circuitry, and that framework is more interconnected than most people realize. When we think of pain, we often associate it with nociceptors, pain, sensing neurons, and the spinal cord transmitting distress signals to the brain. Conversely, pleasure often conjures thoughts of dopamine, serotonin, endorphins, and reward. But in truth, the divide between these sensations isn't as clean-cut. Instead, the very regions of the brain that process pain are also deeply involved in processing pleasure. And this overlap is not a coincidence. It's a functional and necessary part of human survival and behavior regulation. At the core of this overlap is the concept that pain and pleasure operate in a dynamic balance, a biological seesaw, if you will. This means that changes in one can and do directly influence the other. This is rooted in evolutionary necessity. Our nervous system had to be designed in such a way that survival behaviors like eating, mating, and social bonding would be reinforced through pleasure, while damaging or life-threatening situations would invoke pain, discouraging repetition. But over time, as our environments became less threatening and more stimulating, often artificially so, we began to decouple effort from reward. This decoupling disrupts the pain-pleasure balance and makes us increasingly sensitive to minor stressors, while simultaneously desensitizing us to the things that should bring us joy. If we go deeper into the neurobiology of this shared circuitry, one area of immense importance is the peri, aqueductal gray, or PAG, located in the midbrain. The PAG plays a central role in modulating pain and is involved in descending pain control, meaning it helps regulate how much pain information actually reaches conscious awareness. However, this same area is involved in the experience of euphoria under certain conditions. This dual role shows how the same physical structure can be turned up or down depending on the context and the biochemical state of the individual. Similarly, the mesolimbic dopamine system, including the ventral tegmental area (VTA) and nucleus accumbens, is well known for its role in processing rewards. But it's also responsive to aversive stimuli. Studies show that dopamine neurons can be excited by both reward, predicting cues, and punishment, avoiding cues. That is, dopamine does not simply fire for pleasure, it fires for salience, for motivational significance. Whether that salience is associated with something good or something bad is often shaped by perception, conditioning, and neurochemical context. This brings us to an important point about how tightly interwoven pain and pleasure truly are. When you engage in an activity that is intensely effortful, painful, or uncomfortable, such as intense physical training or voluntary cold exposure, you are not just enduring suffering. You're also stimulating systems in the brain that, once the discomfort subsides, can swing the system back into a pleasurable state. This rebound effect is measurable in neurochemical terms. Dopamine levels rise after cold exposure. Endorphins, which are the body's natural painkillers and mood enhancers, are also released in response to controlled stress. This rebound mechanism is not just a curiosity of neuroscience, it's an essential lever for building resilience. When you understand that the very act of experiencing discomfort voluntarily leads to a stronger, more potent release of pleasure-related neurochemicals afterward, you can begin to architect your own emotional and behavioral state. In other words, you can train your brain to feel better more often, not by chasing pleasure, but by strategically engaging with controlled pain. This brings us to a societal and cultural observation worth noting. In modern environments, we are surrounded by hyper-palatable foods, endless streams of digital content, and near-instant gratification mechanisms. Social media, for example, delivers social reward cues, likes, comments, engagement without the effort or vulnerability that used to be involved in real-world social interactions. Similarly, access to entertainment or dopamine triggers is now at our fingertips 24/7. But what happens when you bombard a system with too much pleasure, especially pleasure unearned? You push the seesaw out of balance. The baseline of pleasure rises temporarily, and then it crashes. The brain compensates by reducing its sensitivity to dopamine. This is known as downregulation. The more often you artificially stimulate the dopamine system without effort, the less effective it becomes. What follows is a phenomenon we could call hedonic adaptation, where things that used to feel good no longer do, and things that are only slightly uncomfortable feel disproportionately painful. This is why people often feel anxious, depressed, or overwhelmed in environments that are objectively comfortable. The nervous system is no longer tuned to the natural rhythm of effort followed by reward. Instead, it becomes hypersensitive to pain and increasingly numb to pleasure. The solution is not to eliminate all pleasurable stimuli, rather, it's to recalibrate the system by reintroducing effort as a prerequisite for pleasure. One of the most well-supported interventions in this domain is voluntary physical effort, particularly high-intensity exercise. When you run, lift weights, or perform endurance-based activities, you're not just strengthening your muscles. You're sending a message to your brain and body that discomfort is purposeful. You are training your nervous system to interpret pain differently, to anticipate reward after effort. And most importantly, you're activating many of the same circuits involved in pleasure, but in a sustainable, biologically aligned way. Another example is fasting. When you abstain from food for a period, your body experiences discomfort. But this discomfort activates systems that increase focus, energy, and even mood. After the fast, food tastes better, feels more rewarding, and stimulates a greater dopamine response than if you had eaten without any prior deprivation. Again, the principle holds: pain or effort first, pleasure after. This sequence trains the nervous system to remain sensitive and responsive. Moreover, the sense of control plays a crucial role in this process. Pain that is predictable and voluntary is experienced very differently than pain that is imposed or unpredictable. This explains why athletes willingly endure extreme physical pain during competition, or why people climb mountains or complete ultramarathons. It's not because they are immune to pain, it's because they understand that the reward on the other side is not just the dopamine hit, but the identity reinforcement, the growth in capacity, and the elevation in baseline mood. Interestingly, there's also emerging research on the use of brief pain to treat conditions like depression or addiction. For instance, certain forms of electrical stimulation or even cold exposure protocols are being explored as interventions for individuals whose dopamine systems have become dysregulated through chronic substance use or compulsive behaviors. These approaches work, in part, by reintroducing the natural rhythm of discomfort and relief, which helps reset the brain's reward pathways. So, what does all of this mean in practical terms? It means that pain and pleasure are not fixed, passive sensations that simply happen to us. They are experiences shaped by perception, context, neurochemistry, and most critically, behavior. You can actively shape your brain's sensitivity to both by making conscious decisions about how, when, and why you engage with discomfort and reward. The next time you experience pain or discomfort, instead of asking, "How can I get rid of this?" consider asking, "What is this teaching me? And what might be on the other side of this effort?" That mindset alone activates different brain circuits, ones associated with purpose, meaning, and endurance. Likewise, when engaging with pleasurable experiences, take a moment to consider, did I earn this? Did I engage my nervous system in a way that makes this pleasure sustainable? These questions aren't meant to induce guilt or shame, but to help you navigate the pain-pleasure seesaw consciously. This neurobiological awareness becomes a tool for empowerment. Instead of being at the mercy of shifting emotional states, you start to understand the mechanisms behind them. You begin to recognize that pleasure without effort is often empty, while effort that ends in growth generates lasting satisfaction. And in that realization, you gain the ability to design your own life, from the inside out through the lens of science, resilience, and self-directed neuroplasticity. Dopamine is often mischaracterized as the molecule of pleasure, a simplistic label that misses the profound role it plays in shaping human experience. At its core, dopamine is not about feeling good in the moment. It's about anticipation, motivation, and the pursuit of outcomes. It's the neurochemical currency that drives us to act. It signals importance, salience, and the potential for reward. Whether that reward is food, achievement, a social interaction, or even the avoidance of pain, dopamine is the system that orients the brain and body toward that goal. What makes dopamine particularly interesting in the context of pain and pleasure is that it is inherently context-sensitive. It's not just the presence of dopamine that determines your state of mind, but the pattern of its release, the baseline at which it operates, and how frequent and intense the peaks are relative to that baseline, and herein lies the central issue in how modern environments are affecting our minds and bodies. We are increasingly exposed to short, sharp dopamine spikes through artificial means, social media notifications, hyper-palatable foods, instant entertainment, and these spikes deplete the system, not enhance it. To understand this, we need to look at how the brain responds to frequent and high-intensity dopamine peaks. Each time you engage in a pleasurable or exciting activity, especially one that comes with minimal effort, you experience a dopamine increase, a peak. But when that peak is followed by another and another without sufficient recovery or meaningful engagement, something called dopamine downregulation occurs. This is a homeostatic mechanism. The brain reduces the availability or sensitivity of dopamine receptors in order to protect itself from overstimulation. The result is that subsequent experiences feel dull, motivation drops, and tolerance increases. This tolerance isn't just limited to the specific behavior. The effect is global across the dopamine system. So, a person who chronically stimulates their dopamine system with digital content or sugary foods might find themselves less motivated to work, exercise, or connect socially, not because they're lazy, but because their brain is less able to register the salience of effort-based rewards. It's not a character flaw. It's neurochemical adaptation. Now, let's explore what this means for pain and pleasure. Dopamine influences not just the experience of reward, but also the perception of effort and discomfort. When dopamine levels are healthy and well regulated, the pursuit of effortful goals, even those that involve pain, can feel meaningful and even enjoyable. The discomfort becomes tolerable because the brain is anticipating the reward. But when dopamine signaling is compromised, the same level of effort can feel insurmountable, and even mild discomfort can be perceived as severe pain. This is part of why dopamine plays a crucial role in resilience. There's also the timing of dopamine release to consider. In a healthy, well-regulated system, dopamine rises in response to challenge and anticipation, not just the reward itself. This rise drives action. It helps us push through pain in the gym, discomfort in a tough conversation, or boredom in focused work. But if you shift your dopamine response to the reward alone, say, checking your phone only to feel good or eating for pleasure without hunger, you weaken this anticipatory mechanism. Over time, this dulls the brain's motivation circuits, making pain feel more intense and pleasure less satisfying. What's interesting is that pain itself can increase dopamine, but only when it is voluntary and framed properly. For example, cold exposure has been shown to increase dopamine levels up to 2.5 times baseline, and this elevation can last for hours. Exercise, especially resistance training or cardiovascular exertion, produces similar effects. These types of activities are inherently uncomfortable. They introduce pain, but because they are chosen, time-limited, and meaningful, the brain responds with increased dopamine production. This shows that pain, when embraced under the right conditions, can reinvigorate the reward system. There's a fascinating study in this context involving rodents. Researchers found that when animals had to work harder for a reward, such as pushing a lever multiple times or navigating a maze, the dopamine release upon receiving the reward was greater than when the same reward was given freely. This implies that effort amplifies reward. Translated to human behavior, this means that what you work for, struggle through, or endure pain to achieve becomes neurochemically more rewarding than what comes easily. This is deeply relevant in a world where convenience is prioritized above all. So how do we repair or optimize this system? The key is strategic dopamine management, which involves understanding how to pace dopamine exposure, how to introduce effort before reward, and how to train the brain to value process over outcome. The first step is recognizing the behaviors that cause chronic dopamine spiking without effort. For many people, these include frequent scrolling on social media, binge eating, compulsive shopping, or substance use. Each of these activities triggers a dopamine spike that is unearned, and over time, these spikes flatten the system. A good rule of thumb is, if the activity delivers immediate reward with no struggle, and if it's repeatable in short bursts, it's likely to downregulate your dopamine system. The antidote is to delay gratification and create friction before reward. This can be as simple as waiting 10 minutes before checking your phone when you feel the impulse, or exercising before consuming a highly desired meal. The delay in effort shift the dopamine response to the anticipatory phase, reinforcing motivational circuits and protecting the baseline. Another powerful tool is to engage in regular activities that are inherently effortful and non-dopamine spiking at the outset. These include things like cold showers, fasting, breath hold practices, and deep work without distraction. Each of these activities is unpleasant in the moment, but they create a dopaminergic rebound, a delayed but longer-lasting elevation in mood and motivation. Importantly, these activities also train the brain to decouple reward from ease, which is vital for long-term fulfillment and success. Mindset plays a critical role as well. The meaning you assign to discomfort influences the neurochemical response. If you frame pain as destructive or meaningless, it becomes intolerable, but if you frame it as purposeful, as part of a growth process, the brain responds with adaptive plasticity. This plasticity is governed in part by dopamine and neuromodulators like norepinephrine, which signal the brain that this experience is worth encoding and adapting to. Over time, your tolerance for discomfort increases, your motivation improves, and your pleasure in simple things returns. In clinical settings, this understanding is being used to treat conditions like depression and addiction. Behavioral activation therapy, for example, encourages patients to engage in effort-based activities that initially feel aversive but lead to natural dopamine increases. Over time, this retrains the reward system. Similarly, protocols involving cold exposure or structured exercise have been shown to alleviate symptoms of anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure, by restoring dopamine sensitivity. Importantly, the dopamine system is not isolated. It interacts with stress systems, hormonal systems, and the immune system. Chronic stress, for instance, reduces dopamine transmission in the prefrontal cortex, leading to impaired executive function, impulsivity, and mood dysregulation. But acute, well-managed stress like that experienced during exercise or controlled exposure to cold can increase dopamine and improve stress resilience. This shows that not all stress is bad. The type of stress and your relationship to it determines its neurochemical outcome. So, to summarize this at a personal level, if you want to gain control over your pain and pleasure experience, start by controlling how you stimulate your dopamine system. Stop chasing easy highs, introduce effort, delay reward, choose discomfort when it's meaningful, reframe pain as purposeful, and pay attention to the rebound, because that rebound, that delayed surge of dopamine after effort or pain, is the most powerful pleasure mechanism your brain has. When you understand and apply this, you begin to shift from being reactive to being proactive. You're no longer at the mercy of how you feel. You begin to orchestrate your own biochemical state, not perfectly, but directionally. You build momentum, drive, and resilience. And perhaps most importantly, you recover your capacity to find deep pleasure in the simple, beautiful things life has to offer, things that were always there, waiting to be felt again.